16 times referring to him as the former president, in some lines that seemed almost designed to trigger Trump, going directly after him, adding emphasis in lines when he said that he was the defeated former president. But in the end, as President Biden was leaving Capitol Hill today, he was asked by a reporter why he didn't name Trump directly. And Jake, he said it's because it wasn't about Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, but what he said it more was, and I'm quoting him now, about the system and somebody who decides to put himself above everything.
All right, Caitlin Collins, thank you so much. Across the country, supporters of Donald Trump who pushed the big lie are still pressuring local election officials to revisit the past election and to recount the 2020 vote. As CNN's Sarah Murray reports, there are a lot of people running for office, and observers are concerned that they want to make it easier to overturn election victories that they don't like in the future.
I'm Ron Hanks, and I approve this message.
U.S. Senate hopeful Ron Hanks is shooting at fake Dominion voting machines and calling for an audit in Colorado, a state Joe Biden won in 2020 by more than 13 points. In liberal Washington state, a local Republican party is knocking on doors trying to uncover voter fraud.
We're canvassing now in about a dozen counties.
In Crow Wing, Minnesota, a bright red county in a state that's gone blue since 1976, residents are pressing the Board of Commissioners for an audit based on false and misleading pretenses.
That log will tell us if that thing went onto the internet and switched any votes.
And in Alabama, which former President Trump carried by 25 points, Republican Secretary of State John Merrill is still batting back unfounded claims of fraud.
I think a lot of that is people listening to people who have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. It's almost as if they will claim that a murder was committed, and yet they cannot prove that the person ever lived, let alone a body or a weapon.
In the years since rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol in the elections, many Republicans are still lapping up Trump's election lies. They're pressuring local officials to revisit 2020. Some are even running for higher office. Others are passing legislation making it easier to meddle in election administration.
32 of those bills have become law in 17 states, which is a really unprecedented amount of legislative interest in the mechanics of election administration.
Efforts to undermine confidence in election results began in hotly contested battleground states, but have since ballooned into a nationwide crusade. In Colorado, election officials like Justin Grantham are aware of Hank's ad.
With this copy machine that he blew up with a rifle? Yes, I have seen that.
But State Representative Hanks rebuffed offers to learn about the voting systems firsthand.
I've extended multiple offers for him to come in my office and talk to me about the election, and he's not responded and not committed.
Hanks told CNN he appreciates the offers, but he did his own research.
I didn't really need it. I was at other locations, and so that made it rather redundant.
Asked why he's still spreading debunked conspiracies, Hanks says nothing has been debunked.
I think that is a false argument. We have found evidence, and it is compounding daily.
Back in Alabama, when Merrill met with election deniers, including MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell,
the whole technology was attacked.
He easily debunked their claims.
The information that they had been sharing with us could have been cleared up by doing a simple Google search of addresses.
Other officials, though, are aiming to appease their constituents. When CNN asked a Crow Wing commissioner, who previously said he's confident in the county's election, for an interview,
I got an email last night. I'm going to read it.
he declined, instead reading our interview request to audit supporters in a county meeting.
Sarah Murray, CNN News.
This week, he and other board members voted to ask Minnesota's Secretary of State to launch an audit.
Motion passes.
Now, democracy advocates worry that this swirl of disinformation could lead to more violence around future elections. Even Dominion Voting warned that violent ads like the one Ron Hanks is running in Colorado can endanger its employees as well as its customers. Jake.
Sarah Murray, thank you so much. Joining us now to discuss, Georgia Republican Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan and Michigan's Democratic Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. Secretary Benson, let me start with you. The Washington Post spoke with Michigan's Attorney General Dana Nessel, and here's what she told them about her challenger, who's a Trump-backed conservative who filed a lawsuit challenging the vote in Michigan. Quote, "There is no question that if I am replaced by Matthew DePerno, democracy falls in Michigan. Not maybe, not possibly, certainly." He has made it clear not only that he supports the big lie, he's one of the originators of the big lie, unquote. Now, obviously she faces an election challenge there, but do you think that's hyperbole? And if not, What does that mean for the people of Michigan if their democracy falls?
No, it's not hyperbole. Democracy is on the ballot this fall, and it is an opportunity for voters to hold accountable those who have lied time and time again, spreading misinformation about the truth of the 2020 election. But it's also a potential opportunity for those bad actors who have clearly shown they don't believe in democracy to gain the levers of power over our democracy that I, as the chief election official, that the Attorney General, as the chief law enforcement officer, maintain to protect and preserve the integrity of our elections. If that authority is handed over to individuals who clearly do not believe in democracy and have used their careers to try to dismantle it, then indeed democracy could fall and wither on the vine here in our state and around the country.
Lieutenant Governor Duncan, we hear the phrase democracy in peril quite a bit. It maybe for some people can start to lose meaning after a while, but you have predicted a, quote, political civil war in Georgia. What do you mean by that?
Well, we continue to be the center point of the political universe here in Georgia, and it seems that we're going to be a continued proving ground for democracy, but also for a style of leadership going forward. This notion that populism makes sense in a long-term fashion in leadership is just a false narrative. We need real leadership right now. And so we've got a busy 12 months ahead trying to defend what we're doing here in Georgia and really put on display for the rest of the country what conservative leadership is all about.
Secretary Benson, NPR conducted an analysis of the races for secretaries of state across the country, found at least 15 Republican candidates who pushed the big lie about the 2020 election, including one running against you. What's your message to the secretaries of state throughout the country who are on the front lines of this fight? Democrat, Republican, who have held the line and protected democracy, including Secretary Raffensperger in Georgia, a conservative Republican.
Well, it's important on days like today in particular to recognize that in 2020 democracy prevailed because good people on both sides of the aisle did the right thing and protected the integrity of the accurate results of the election. And it's incumbent upon all of us now who are on the ballot to tell the truth, to continue to emphasize the importance of the state's chief election officer as one who puts country first over party, and to build a national coordinated nonpartisan coalition in support of pro-democracy election officials, as there is on the other side a clear national coordinated strategy to replace us with those who do not believe in democracy.
And part of that, Lieutenant Governor Duncan, we should know, just for people who heard your last answer and aren't Georgians or aren't political junkies, what's going on is you're the Lieutenant Governor of Georgia. The governor, Brian Kemp, he's running for re-election. He faces a primary challenge from conservative Republican David Perdue, who he's recasting himself as a MAGA Trump Republican, and he says he wouldn't have certified the election the way that Governor Kemp did, and this is really the biggest difference between them, right? Is that Governor Kemp abided by the state constitution and did his constitutional duty, and David Perdue is recasting himself as somebody who will just bend to Trump's will.
Yeah, David Perdue's primary challenge against Brian Kemp is a synthetic primary challenge. The only distance between the two of them is one appears to be willing to lie that the president won the election here in Georgia, which he didn't, and one is not willing and is going to speak the truth, and that's Brian Kemp. I mean, he is literally the most conservative governor in Georgia's history and deserves an opportunity to continue to lead us. And Jake, to that point, I think if any Republican going forward is going to be taken seriously, they're going to have to have either gotten it right out of the gates, which is a pretty few, slim number of Republicans, or they're going to have to be reckoned with the fact of saying in front of a camera, I got it wrong, and it's time to move on.
Secretary Benson, let me ask you about election reform efforts in Congress. There are Republicans open to overhauling the Electoral Count Act of 1887, which is kind of written sloppily, and it's the law that Trump and his allies were trying to use to convince Pence that he could overturn the election. I know that's not what Democrats want. Democrats want sweeping election reforms, but shouldn't Democrats at least try to get this part fixed and work with Republicans on that?
I think there are really three things that we need from the federal government. One is sustained funding for our elections and our democracy. The cost of running elections is increasing, and that's something that we need from the federal government. Two are a basic floor of protections against what we've seen in nearly every state in this country to make it more difficult for everyday citizens to vote and hold their elected officials accountable. And then finally, we do need federal protections against election subversion, and reforming the Electoral Count Act has got to be a critical piece of that. So all of these things, three things are needed. None is dispositive. None is, full election in support from the federal government requires action on all three. And certainly if one comes before the other, that's great, but as long as that does not negate the need to have the other two. So I fully support the efforts to reform the Electoral Count Act, but not, we have to make sure it's not at the expense of the other things we also need.
Thanks to both of you. Appreciate it. The lesson that House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy appears to have learned from the insurrection and what that could mean if he gets what he has always wanted, that speaker's gavel. Plus, Republican